To break down the headlines from the Democratic perspective, we want to bring on Laura Fink, a Democratic strategist and the CEO for Rebelle Communications. So Laura, when we look at what's going on in the country right now, I feel like when you talk to the American people, there is consensus that they do want police reforms to some degree. But then when we see what's happening right now on Capitol Hill, it doesn't look like we're going to get those reforms. We see the Senate bill have their own version led by Republicans, of course. Democrats have their own in the lower chamber. Do you think we will get progress on this issue?
Well, I think that's really up to the Republicans in the Senate under Mitch McConnell. The fact of the matter is that Americans are marching in the streets because they want real reform. And just as you said, it's a broad array of Americans. So they don't just want to see nominal support and lip service. And unfortunately, the Republican bill really is weak on a number of fronts. The Democratic bill being addressed in the House is much more substantial. It bans the chokehold. It doesn't just limit it. It doesn't just create a database. It holds officers accountable. It removes qualified immunity so that we make sure that victims who've had their constitutional rights violated will have their day in court. And it makes sure that police officers get the training funding that they need, and it works on ending racial profiling. It's much more comprehensive than the Republican bill. It's time for real change, or you wouldn't see the momentum that we see today. This is the civil rights issue of our time, and it needs to be addressed comprehensively, not just with little nips and tucks.
And the points that are holding up the Republican bill, by the way, I think it's qualified immunity and the prohibition on chokeholds. There is an exception that Republicans have in their bill saying that they do want to limit chokeholds. They say that they'll do away with federal funding to departments that don't do away with that practice, but it doesn't outright do away with it altogether. So do you think that as we move forward, you laid out exactly why Democrats think that their bill is better in the lower chamber compared to Republicans in the upper chamber, but Republicans have said that they are willing to make amendments to their bill as they move along. Is this one of those instances where maybe some progress is better than no progress, or do you disagree with that?
I would disagree with that, because if you act like you've done something when really you've done nothing, we literally have Black men dying in the streets. And if you simply pay lip service to that, and that it doesn't end that practice, if we don't address holistically police reform, and we don't address the history of abuse, we don't create real consequences, it's a problem. That when you're talking about just with the chokehold, Republicans have created a loophole so big you could drive a Mack truck through it. That's not going to actually stop police officers from using the chokehold where they otherwise would. They've always got a reason. They can always say, well, I needed to. And so we really need to create real accountability and real reform. Qualified immunity has only existed since the 60s. And even Justice Clarence Thomas has said that he has some real issues with it and thinks the Supreme Court should take it up. Congress has the chance to take it up now and truly look at racial justice issues and really make sure that equal rights are protected under the law, so that Black people are not receiving real risk from police officers. So Black moms don't have to sit down with their kids and have a talk about how to protect yourself from the officers that are sworn to protect and serve them.
And you mentioned the idea that there is a lot of support behind the Black Lives Matter movement. A lot of people are saying right now that they are very much so on board. The polls show that the general American people are on board with the idea of making these police reforms across the country. But I think a lot of people, not only on the right, but also the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party, are asking, why is this only an issue once every 4 years? I mean, for example, Ta-Nehisi Coates, he's an author, that said that under President Barack Obama, they had 8 years to address this issue. Now under President Trump, they've had 3 years to address this issue, but it's only now coming up once again. Have Democrats dropped the ball a little bit when it comes to this issue in some degree, or do you think that this is just something that is happening organically, conveniently once every 4 years?
I think it's been 400 years since we ended slavery in this country, and we have a legacy of racism and discrimination that we've all failed to address. And I think the starting point is just to begin to admit that and to say that we've all failed, because the system persists in discriminating against Black people and other people of color, but particularly when you authorize the use of force. And law enforcement are the only people in this country that are authorized to determine when to use force in our country against our citizens. And that is an extraordinary thing. And we need to look at that and treat it very carefully. And I think all Americans, and what's amazing about this movement is you're starting to see white America come along, because, Black folks have been talking about this for a very long time and the impact that it's had on their communities. But now white people are starting to get on the bus. and starting to come together and say, this is not the America that I want to live in and that I want to be part of. And that really our strength as Americans is in our ability to evolve and change and address equity and address justice. And that's what we're seeing here. So we could all do well to make improvements.
No, I think you're right. And even when we think back to really the inception, if you will, of this latest movement, not the one that's been going on for, as you were saying, years, but the one that's really ignited this latest news cycle is George Floyd. When people saw that video, I think Americans all across the country, regardless of skin color, political affiliation, they looked at that video and said, this isn't exactly right. Something needs to be changed here. And I think that is what's prompting kind of the major support that you're talking about right now. It's not necessarily along political lines, but the solution looks like it might be along political lines when we get to our lawmakers. But before I let you go too, I want to talk about what this means for the elections as well. Vice President Joe Biden has said that he wants to not only put a black woman on the court if he were to, of course, become president, but he wants to get there by putting a black woman as his vice presidency on the ticket. Do you think that this will make a big difference, and do you have a preference of who he'd put on that ticket?
I think representation matters. I think seeing people in positions of power and authority that look like you can inspire a generation of people. We need America's leaders to look like America. And Joe Biden moving to put a black woman on the ticket would be a great step forward for that. Such was the case when we saw Walter Mondale put Geraldine Ferraro on the ticket. And when we saw a number of women, including Kamala Harris, raise their hand and say, I'm going to run for president. And that kind of brings me to my pick. I'm from California. I've seen what Kamala Harris, Senator Harris, can do firsthand. She's a leader on racial justice issues. She has been in law enforcement, so she understands the ins and outs of what it will take to reform the system. And she was a tremendous presidential candidate that I think whose campaign ended maybe a little bit too soon. So she's my pick in the land where making predictions is so 2016. I would love to see her on the ticket with Joe Biden.
And it looks like they are going that route. But I think that still, even with her, there are some concerns as whether or not she can unite the progressive wing of the party and the moderate wing of the party. But I think that burden is a little bit more on Joe Biden. I mean, not too many people come out to necessarily and vote for the VP, although I think the VP will be bigger in this election than prior ones. I think it's up to Joe Biden to unite the different wings of the Democratic Party if they want to be in contention come November. But Laura Fink, I really appreciate you coming on, breaking down this issue with us. Thank you.